right, hello everyone, and welcome to IO in Action, where we dive into the science of work and the people who make it happen. Join us today as we explore the latest research, real-world applications, and expert insights into the world of industrial organizational psychology. Today on IO in Action, we're excited to welcome Jim Taylor, the Director of the Center for Organizational Effectiveness with expertise in executive coaching, leadership, and talent management strategies. Welcome, Jim.
Good afternoon.
Also joining us today, we are excited to welcome Dr. Richard Griffith, the Executive Director of the Institute of Culture, Collaboration, and Management with expertise in cross-cultural management and global concerns in IO psychology. Welcome, Rich.
Good afternoon.
So today we'll be diving into some of the trends we expect to see in IO psychology in 2025. First, we wanted to take a focus on future-proofing in organizations. So I want to ask you both. How do you define future-proofing organizations, and why is it so critical as we look ahead to the future of our organizations?
Typically, when I think about future-proofing, you're looking for what are threats that are beyond the horizon for an organization. And if they're able to identify those threats, then what they can do is mitigate the risks that come with those threats, or start to put some plans in place that would allow them to mitigate those risks. And of course, those are unknown. So you have to have kind of a broad solution that is flexible.
Yeah, I pretty much look at future-proofing really sometimes as simple as just anticipation. And if your organization or your department or your group is able to anticipate what is coming in the future, again, Rich mentioned risk mitigation. Obviously, that's something that's really important. But it's not a matter just about avoiding catastrophe, even though that is really a lot of times why it was created. It's out to also find areas that your organization is going to be able to grow and prosper in.
So taking a look into the future seems like it's very important for organizations, but not everybody future-proofs. Could you tell us some reasons why you think organizations don't focus resources into future-proofing?
I think it's built right into your question when you mention resources, because you have to have slack resources to future-proof. You have to take care of the business that you are working on today, and then have enough resources where you could have a team that is scanning beyond the horizon and putting together some of those plans. And most of those plans are never going to come into fruition. So it looks like wasted resources, and a lot of organizations just don't have the resources, and or they don't have what is the foresight to think about doing this.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that when you can't put the cost on something that doesn't happen, when you talk to selling future-proofing to CFOs of the world, and you're trying to say how it's going to potentially save us from catastrophe or some horrible event that happens, while it may be considered like insurance, companies aren't so apt to do that, because a lot of companies are also run, most companies, my experience tells me, are also run by very smart people, especially they think they're very smart. So it's like, I got this, we got this figured out, and they then focus on what's currently happening in this quarter. I think what you'll find is a lot of industry, especially industries attached to Wall Street, they're looking at things on a quarter-by-quarter basis. To have them think a year, 2, 3 years, 5 years is a tough exercise for them to do.
So why do you both think that we will see more future-proofing in 2025?
I think one of the main drivers of it is the speed of change that is occurring. We just have change coming at us at 100 miles an hour. And these are big changes that are occurring. So it's got companies rocked on their heels a little bit. And the smart ones that are going to survive in 2025 and beyond will learn their lesson and realize that the speed of change is the new normal. And they're going to have to prepare for it in some sense. And future-proofing is just part of that solution.
Yeah, I would, without going too much further, I would say the speed of change is definitely it. Things are happening so fast, so quickly, and so abruptly. This is another word I could think of. Yeah. Is that, if you're not have some level of preparedness for that, you can be left behind and may not be able to survive it.
So have you all taken part in any future-proofing initiatives? Do you have any history in those kinds of things?
Yeah, we've been doing future proofing here at Florida Tech now for the past couple of years. And, there are sort of deep changes that are occurring, and you've got surface level communication changes that need to accompany that. But it's a full-time gig. So, it gets back to what we were talking about before. You have to have the resources to be able to do your day-to-day operations just to pay the bills, and then somehow have the extra resources that can allow you to look downrange.
Yeah, I think, these is one of those things that future proofing is called a lot of different names and a lot of different times. It's kind of the name today that they're using a lot. You could argue that a lot of future proofing should be contained in a really good strategic plan. So I've been doing a lot of strategic planning with organizations really throughout my career. And there's always a certain aspect of it where you're trying to anticipate and predict what's going to happen in the future. The joke is that as soon as you created a strategic plan, it's obsolete the day you create it, right? So you got to take that into consideration. But it's just been called other things other than future proofing, and primarily, with my experience, it's been called strategic planning.
I would say if you look at the planning process, where it starts to get into future proofing is where you've got your primary plan, but then you're going to have an alternate plan, a contingency plan. So if you're planning deeply, now all of a sudden you're getting into the future a little bit more, and you're being flexible in what you may be doing in the future to address those challenges.
Yeah, and I think that what Rich said makes sense. The deeply planning part, because you'll find a lot of times even planning is done on a very surface level. You have an acquisition, you try to make it, doesn't work, you go to something else. Now that I said really quickly, but that may take a year, but unless you really sit down and go deep, and a lot of times you do that when you maybe talk about a product, different type of product release, or different vertical that your company may actually decide to enter, where those take some serious deep planning. Although I'll be honest with you, the ones that work are the ones that do that.
Do you all have any tips for organizations that are looking to start intentionally future-proofing and not just go with that plan, the first plan that they create? They really want to focus their efforts.
If I were going to be giving someone some advice, I think it's to be systematic about it, because your natural inclination is to use your instincts. And people trust their instincts a lot, and instincts could be fine. They have served you well your whole life. But to do future proofing in an adequate way, I think it's got to have a data element. It has to be broad. It has to be supported by the science. And that's not something that you do in your winging. You've got to do that in a systematic fashion.
I think to make it systematic, you have to, obviously it has to be part of what they do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And usually that is something that is driven by leadership. And I would argue the CEO of the company. If the CEO of the company is not buying into this, it's only going to be done at the surface level. But there are some companies that really make it part of their mission. You hear about companies that say, I don't want another company to make us obsolete. I want to make ourselves obsolete. In other words, they're focused so much on what's next. If you make it part of your mission, part of what you do on an ongoing basis, I think that's the only way it can be sustainable.
Another bit of advice I might give would be to plan for multiple futures. So, okay, there's one coming down the pipe, but you don't know which one. And what looked like a certain bet this morning could change by the afternoon. So if you have what is a deep plan, but also a broad plan, it allows you to be flexible and adjust without having all the anxiety that goes with change. That's half the battle, is keeping people calm in the face of what can be existential threats. And to do that, you just got to make sure you have a solid plan that you can switch gears on really quick.
So it seems like there's a tension between resources and future-proofing. Do you all think it's possible to future-proof with very few resources? Is that something that's even, worth an organization putting their time and effort into?
I think it's definitely worth it. I think if you don't have the people resources, maybe you have financial resources. You could bring in a firm to actually do future proofing for your organization. So that's something that a consulting firm like even the center would do, something like that. So is it possible? Yeah, but lack of resources cannot be your excuse not to do it. because I think that's a slippery slope when you start adding, well, we can't afford to do this. You can afford not to.
Yeah, there's a tension with the resources, but being resourceful is part of your job as a leader, is to get more out of the rock than there is in the rock. And that's a mindset that you have. And if you start to get your entire team pulling the rope in the same direction, and they realize that sometimes the resources are soft. If you trust your team, that's a resource. And the results that you get when you let your team just kind of run and do their thing sometimes are surprising, and then the resources start to snowball. You can leverage one resource to get to another. So I don't think you would want to set it aside saying, well, we're just not mature enough for that. Yeah, but it's going to look different than a mature organization that's going to go back and do future proofing.
So future proofing is a trend that we predict we'll see more of in 2025 in IO psychology. On that same note, in the past few years, there's been a lot of developments in artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of innovation there. So we want to look at another trend today, AI innovation in academia versus in business. So AI is transforming many industries, but how is it being applied differently in academia versus business settings, especially in IO psychology?
I think the simple answer, and I'm not sure captures everything, but business is doing a better job of it. One, they've got more resources that are going to be necessary on the front end using AI, and they have processes that are usually repeated. So if you've got repetitive processes, then that's where AI is going to be most beneficial, in that it's mimicking what are human decisions. It's just doing it really fast, and you can scale those actions. So because business has a repetitive function, then they can benefit from it a little bit more. Academia, I don't want to say it's a one-off, but you have a research question, you go after that, and then you go after another research question, and it's changing. So AI is going to be less helpful for you when the landscape is more fluid, because then you would have to be essentially programming or setting up AI models for every new problem that you encountered. And that doesn't make sense. Those are going to be really resource intensive. The results that you get are maybe equivalent to what is human judgment. So you could do it faster if you've got one-offs, if you're going to have people do that rather than AI. So at this stage, I would say that business is far ahead of academia in the use of AI.
Yeah, I would agree with Rich. I think that primarily it's because of speed and their ability to do things quickly, and not just their ability, their demand to do things quickly. It's not going to be uncommon for someone, a CEO, to ask for a problem to be solved that a rational person might say will take a year to solve, and they give you a month. So you have no choice but to be very innovative in your solution, and to utilize AI. And I also think there's a little less requisite requirement for perfection, is that if I can get 80% right, we're going with it. And we're not waiting to another 2 months that we might get 100%. We're not going to wait those 2 months because we didn't answer now, which is kind of what a lot of times business is. A lot of times what I end up doing on the consulting side is I literally have enough time to get 60% of the information, and they want me to give them an answer. And I can't wait to do it, where ideally for a perfect solution, it may take longer, and you could maybe do that through academia. That's what I kind of see as the big difference.
I think Jim's, even the percentages Jim's throwing out there, may not even characterize the problem, in an accurate sense. In that, so Jim and I do a lot of work with J&J. They're doing hundreds of billions of dollars of acquisition a year. If we can improve their process by 0.5%, you're talking about $500 million that is saved. So it's a really small improvement that you might be able to do just by tweaking the knobs a little bit, where an academic might sit around in an ivory tower looking for a perfect solution, and that could take 25, 30 years. It still won't be perfect. So I think just being able to help your customers around the margins can have huge gains, and that's what you see in business. Whereas in academics, it tends to be a 0-1 kind of solution. Either it's right or it's wrong, and that's just not how the world works.
You both have a lot of experience in business. So, with the organizations that you've worked with, how have you seen them kind of leverage this AI? In what ways have you seen them use it to improve, their bottom line or improve their employee relations? Have you seen AI leveraged effectively?
Where I've seen it recently, some of the discussions I've had with some of my clients are usually CEOs or chief HR officers, is it comes down to speed again. It used to be, when I worked in corporate America and you had to design a training program, they gave you 6 months to a year, usually a year to design a program from scratch. Now they're giving you, I want a full outline detailed in 30 days and I want it delivered in 60. It's a different expectation because of some of the structure you can create using AI and a lot of the nuances, maybe not, but that's only a matter of time to a certain extent. So I think that that's where I really see it. Now I'm starting to see it also in the talent acquisition side. You see a lot of companies now that are using AI for the first round of interviews. They're actually literally in front of a computer talking to a screen and giving the answers to the screen. It evaluates it and then sends an answer back to real people. So I'm really seeing it, and I can only imagine what it will be even further in the future. But these are some areas right now that I see it really hitting.
Where I see it being used a lot gets back to the first few questions you asked about future proofing, in that if you have a robust AI platform, it could be scanning the horizon for you, analyzing the data and giving you answers before anything ever happens or before you notice that any change has occurred. So a couple of years ago, we had a gig with the Orlando International Airport. They were interested in understanding their customer experience as it compared to other international airports. Essentially, they wanted to benchmark their customer experience, but they didn't belong to any benchmarking service. So, we put together a platform for them that pulled reviews from the web and then analyzed those reviews in a framework that had been put together for customer experience. And these were millions of reviews that were available for free on the web, which is just great data if you're going to make big decisions like that. In IO, we survey a couple hundred people and then we generalize to a massive population, and you can get population level data with a couple million people. So I think that's a great use for AI, is being able to gobble up what is massive amounts of qualitative data and give you a reasonable answer from that data rather than overgeneralizing on what are really small surveys.
So in 2025, where do you see AI impacting IO psychology specifically? Where do you see a rise in the use of AI and making meaningful differences in our field?
Well, I'm going to push most of that question to Rich, but from my side, I kind of see where it currently is an issue, where it currently has big impact. That's just on analytics. Statistics, human capital analytics, I think it's already there, but I can only imagine how fast and how much and how thorough it could be in the future.
Analytics is going to be an interesting area in that, when I was in grad school, my professor in stats was Ralph Alexander, and he was one of the most prolific IO psychologists at the time, in that he was one of the only dudes who really knew stats. So he ended up on every article. So it was a really high level skill. And I got stat friends now that would punch me for saying this, but it won't be for long, because now what you're going to need to be able to do is just write prompts. And then the AI algorithms will go do your stats for you. So it's going to push it down to, it may not be a minimum wage type of job, but it's not going to require a PhD anymore. So I think it's going to get taken out of the hands of expert statisticians. I would say one of the things that would be interesting to explore, not so much where are we in 2025, where should we be using AI, in that AI is a pretty mature technology. It's not like it's coming down the pipe. It's been in our laps for 20 years. So we don't have to create, what are new AI algorithms. What we have to be able to do is create value using AI. And I think that takes a change in the mindset of most IO psychologists that are plugging and chugging and doing repeatable things. And they could use AI to optimize their systems, which means they could do it faster. You can do it faster, you can make a little bit more money. But if you can create value by thinking of a way to use AI to do something that's never been done before, well, then you can make a lot of money. And you're changing the game. And I think IO is ready for that. You have smart people that are starting to interface with business and thinking about how they can use IO methodologies to create value for organizations. AI can be a part of that. And 2025, it's time for us to start making those strides forward as a science and as a profession.
And you start to see already some of my customers are using it in handheld applications. Obviously, computers, where J&J being one of the companies actually, that is beta testing employee relations. Literally, you have a problem, you talk it into the computer, and then they give you pretty darn good answer as far as here's some solutions you should look at. Sometimes for entry-level supervisors, or maybe they're usually missed a lot of the training. They can now look at their phone, look at their computer, and say, "How do I have this tough conversation with this employee of mine?" These are things that used to be a person had to tell that. Well, now they're not having to be a person, so that's already happening. So I can imagine where that might go in the future as far as employee relations, coaching, those types of things.
Yeah.
So how do you all think that academics should support the use of AI? Should they support it just in the research with their colleagues? Should they support it in students gaining that knowledge and those skills and abilities? What do you all think?
Yes. All to yes to all of the above, in that it's not how your colleagues are going to use it. It is a colleague. You want to think about it like a colleague. It's a resource that can help you do things a little bit better. And there was a knee-jerk reaction a couple of years ago where academics said, "Oh no, what's going to happen? We have AI and students are going to cheat." Okay, well, they were going to cheat anyway. So AI didn't cause them to cheat. AI is just a tool. So you could tell them not to use the tool, but then they won't be prepared for the workforce. So you want to teach them how to use it, but use it ethically and use it in a responsible fashion to do what they're already doing, just do it better and do it faster.
Yeah, I'm going to completely pass on this conversation for the most part, since I'm not necessarily a faculty, but I can say from talking to my customers, they're expecting the students to know AI. So they're either going to be self-taught, or it's going to have to be taught in the school, or it's going to have to be taught online or some other thing. So if we're not teaching them, someone needs to, because they're expected to know it when they enter the working world.
And we can use what we already know to make data scientists be more effective at what they're doing. So it's not as if our students are going to go out and learn how to code this stuff. They don't need to. You got data scientists that can do that. But what we know is that, when let's say you're using a machine learning algorithm, that's a common type of AI. Well, you got to have a model and you have to point it in the right direction. And if you're able to efficiently understand the topic and communicate those theoretical concepts to an engineer in their own language, well, then they can better trim that model so that it's going to be more effective coming out of the gate. So not only do we have to train our students about the tools of AI, but how to work in teams that are going to be using AI. And in general, working in multidisciplinary teams is a skill set of its own, but it's something that we're going to need to lean into in what is the next few years.
So in addition to that future-proofing and the AI innovation, we wanted to discuss another trend for 2025 IO psychology, how to retain employees and kind of fend off the poachers. So retaining top talent has become somewhat of a major concern for certain organizations. What are the most effective strategies for keeping employees engaged and motivated in your experience?
I think it's pretty simple. You just got to treat people well. So, if you're going to treat your employees like shit, well, then they're going to look for another place to go. So, if you are respecting them, you're communicating with them, they feel like they've got some degree of psychological safety, and that at the end of the day, they're growing and that they are learning, then they're likely to stick around. And if you don't provide them all those things, they have options now, and they're going to exercise those options.
Yeah, I tend to look at things. I agree with everything Rich said. I look at things a little bit like not all turnover is bad turnover. Poachers are always going to be there, and they're going to go after your best people. They're not going to go after your middle of the road, the lower people. And because of that, you got to have an organization that rewards your best people too. And that might mean creating a performance-based atmosphere or meritocracy. Your best people are the ones that are going to follow that mission. So I think the one thing that kind of builds a culture around it is that if you have a strong mission that people are tied to, it doesn't even matter a lot of times what you're paying them is, or what your even hours that they're working. If they're tied to a mission that they are just passionate about, they're going to be there. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay them more. You're going to have to reduce their hour. You're going to have to do other things if you don't have a very effective mission. I used to be one of those poachers a long time ago. And it's always easy to throw a carrot out there for somebody to, but a lot of times, to Rich's point, the biggest thing is I don't feel appreciated. And people, if I was to give leadership one recommendation that might hinder their people leaving, is to make sure they feel appreciated. It's sometimes as simple as, hey, I really appreciate what you did for me today, pat them on the back, and that will do more than all the little, performance appraisal 5% increases you give them.
So there seems to be kind of a debate in IO psychology. There's one school of thought that says we have too many skilled workers, and there's another school of thought that says, well, we don't have enough skilled workers. So what do you all think? Where do you kind of weigh in on that?
The labor market's really fluid. And so if you would have asked me this question 3 months ago, I would have said we don't have enough. And that's really the sort of demographics that are driving that. In that after COVID, you had a lot of the baby boomers leave the workforce. There was a decline in the population. And the stats, I think at that time, there was 1.6 available jobs for every available applicant, which means there were just not enough butts to put in seats. Now what we've seen in the last, 3 weeks is the federal government's essentially been decimated. And you're going to have a lot of those people, if things continue to move in the direction that they go, moving into the private workforce. And now that's a tricky one in that there'll be more butts to put in seats, but will they be skilled? And will they be skilled for the jobs, not necessarily that we have now, but skilled for the jobs that we're going to have in 5 years or in 10 years? Are they ready for that future proofing that you're talking about? So I don't think it's as clean as a yes/no answer. There's a lot of dynamism in the labor market, and even if you have the people, do you have the right people? Do you have the right skill set to drive business? I think that's not clear right now.
Yeah, I would agree with Rich. I think that one of the things I would agree with him is the question itself is a little too black and white, because this is an answer that probably involves a lot of nuance. There are certain parts of the labor market that there's overpopulation. There's some parts there's underpopulation. You go to any software company and you say, how hard is it for you to find coders or people that work? And they're like, I can't find coders. There are literally so many coders that they hire that there's just not enough. Now there's a lot of places that they have way too many. So the answer itself is really nuanced to industry. It's nuanced to age. Industry, government being one of those that may be needed to be downsized, maybe not as much as it is, who knows, that's going to be argued later. But, it's not uncommon for any normal company out there to lay off 10% of its workforce every 2 years. Happens very frequently. The way to prevent that, if you're giving people advice, is to always continue to, and I know maybe this isn't a topic, but I'll bring it up, is continually upskilling themselves. Upskilling is really important. Organizations that practice that, Johnson & Johnson being one of them, where they're always offering upskilling opportunities, they're anticipating. They're future-proofing by doing that. So that kind of ties back into the future-proofing conversation.
So it seems like upskilling is one way that companies can kind of fend off poachers from other organizations. They can support those individuals in getting more skills. Would you like to elaborate on that? Are there any other ways you think organizations can fend off those poachers?
I think that, yes, upskilling is one of the ways, but that's also just providing developmental opportunities. It's another way for saying that. Yep. So you're either going to provide them an opportunity to do something new, or you let them know that we think so much of you, we're going to give you this step up and opportunity. Again, it's, you're not always going to have the opportunity to go up. Maybe it's sideways, but you're learning different things. The more you know, and the better you are, the more you know in an organization, the more valuable you are. And the more valuable you are if you go someplace else. Mm-hmm. So it's always important for you to to be developed.
Yeah, upskilling, when I think about that term, I tend to think about kind of technical skills. I would use the term development more broadly because then you get into the professional level competencies that are also attractive to people because those allow you to have mobility. If you upskill in a technical area, it's probably only good inside your organization because there's certain ways people like to do things. But if you're developing professional competencies, then you can move around, and if you move around, then you can have more agency in your overall career path. But in addition to the skills, I think we do want to be able to provide people a path to a life that they could see in the future. So that's succession planning. To Jim's point, sometimes that's up, sometimes that's lateral, but people have an idea of where they want to go. And if you show them that path exists in your organization and will help you acquire the skills that you need to get there, then they don't pick up the paper in the morning and start looking around for a job. They're thinking about a future in the organization. So you want to keep them in that spot where that's the only thing they think about is their future in your organization rather than someone else's.
Yeah, to pile on, I do think that I just heard I don't even know who actually made up the quote, and it was talking about vision. And they were interviewing a CEO, and they said, "What's your job?" He goes, "To tie my company's vision to everybody's individual vision." In other words, how can I fit? How can my family vision, how can my career vision fit within the vision of the organization?
Thank you both. So today we discussed 3 trends that we will see in 2025 in IO psychology. We talked about future-proofing organizations, AI and innovation in academia versus in the business realm, and then how to retain employees and fend off poachers. Do you all have any last thoughts that you would like to share on any of these topics? Any final tips for our listeners to take away? Maybe a main idea just to tie everything together?
To me, one of the keys when you start thinking about what the next few years are going to be is to fight the urge that you're going to have to think about them as a continuation of the past few years that we've had. So life's not linear. So just because you made 5 cookies last year doesn't mean you're going to make 6 or you're going to make 4. You might make 500, you might make none. There's nonlinear kind of trends that will occur that make all of the things that you talked about really, really challenging. So it sounds easy to plan for the future, but when it's not known, it's very difficult to be able to do. And what you're going to base it on is what you know, and what you know is wrong. When it comes to what will happen in the future, that's the one certainty that we do have is that tomorrow will not look like today. There's going to be some curveballs in there, and I don't want to say lazy. But that's where when people are less than systematic, they just tend to go with the flow and think the future is going to go in that direction. And that's a trend that'll take your company out.
I would say my recommendations it's not to companies, it's to the individuals. We've been focusing on future-proofing, and they really need to future-proof themselves, their career. And I think sometimes, to Rich's point where he mentioned kind of going with the flow, that's also a mistake on an individual basis. And I think you need to take ownership for your own career development. If you sit there and wait to be developed, that's probably not a great strategy. So the more you are focused and are able to anticipate where your life's going, where your career might be going, the more beneficial it's going to be for you in the long run.
Thank you, Jim and Rich, for coming in today to share your thoughts on these trends in the IO psychology for 2025. We appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you to our listeners for tuning into IO in Action, presented by Florida Tech. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast. Also, get connected with us on LinkedIn at the Center for Organizational Effectiveness and Instagram at Center for Org Effectiveness for more information on the application of science at work. Until next time, keep putting IO into action.